So welcome to another War Game review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander, and today we're taking a look at something of an older game, and by old I mean like this is like 3 or 4 years old, but it's not a brand new game. So we're taking a look at Mrs. Thatcher's War, and this is from White Dog Games, and it's printed by Blue Panther, so it comes from one of those little kind of a 1-inch box that you'd expect from them, and from a few other companies that use Blue Panther for printing and distribution. So, Mrs. Thatcher's War, what are we looking at? This is a solitaire-only game covering, kind of from a larger strategic level, the Falklands War. So, you have 2 separate maps, one for kind of the really kind of larger scale, here's my task force and what am I assigning things to, of intercepting and suppressing Argentine air groups coming from the Argentine mainland, and you have a separate, slightly larger map of the East Falklands, where you have your landing at San Carlos, and then you have these 3 tracks that you have to send your troops down to converge on Port Stanley and force the Argentine surrender. Obviously, if this wasn't obvious, you play as the British in this game. Although I think a defensive game might be interesting, but I think because in the end it was fairly one-sided, it would have to be something of an ahistorical game for it to be interesting or worth playing if you were to do it in reverse. Like, so many of your planes just get intercepted and never make it anywhere where it's necessary by the end of the game. So anyway, I've played a couple other games about the Falklands. One of them is Where There Is Discord, which is an extremely expensive game because it's totally out of print and the company doesn't exist anymore and you can't get it. Which there was a good amount of similarities in the kinds of things that you're concerned about and that you're doing in this game and that game. That's also a solo game as well. But this one is probably a little bit better developed, a little bit more focused, it's a little bit faster. The playtime on this, the back of the box says 1 to 3 hours. This was my first play, and I probably played it for actual playtime, probably 2.5 hours, probably close to that, because I went kind of the whole game and I was taking my time and making sure I was doing it right. In the rules a lot for the first probably 6, 7, 8, 9 turns, and part of that is because there is like a headlines phase where it generates a bunch of different events, and so you have to read each one of those. There's like certain kind of key gate points during the game of like you can't land at San Carlos until it's after turn 7 basically, or turn 7 or later, and so it's making sure you're doing the right things at the right time that you're kind of allowed to do and not missing some things. I think the game was put out in 2017? Might be 2019. 2017. It was 2017. So, yeah, it's 5 years old. There's a couple bits and pieces that were like... There's some detail in the rulebook which isn't on any of the play aids, so you do kind of have to keep looking back at those until you've got... Once you played the whole first game, generally speaking, the little kind of exceptions and consequences of some of the things that happen, I all had in my brain, and so I didn't have to do that, but this isn't one of those really simple, very light war games. Some of the solitaire games out there, it's like there's not a ton of decision space, or there's not a ton of, things are very simple, and you're going through it. There's more to this game than some of those ones, which I really appreciated, and it's, how you distribute your Harriers. How much do you risk of your task force to try and intercept the Grupos on the mainland? Or how much do you dedicate, it's the rush to sink the Belgrano, and the 25th of May, the Argentine carrier, before you have to land? Because once you've landed troops, if those guys are still kicking around, they really hamper your supply chains and logistics. It's very interesting how a lot of the stuff works. And then you've got this big events table, and I think there's a total of like 22 different unique events. Some of those events have like sub-events to them as well, where you roll a die and one of 6 things can happen. And so, you know, at the end of every turn, you're going to do anywhere from like 4 to 5 of those. And so there's a lot of things that can happen, or a lot of things that can change or alter the tactical situation. And so you really, this game keeps you on your toes. And you have to focus on certain things, and some things happen at extremely inopportune moments, and you have to then deal with that. Sometimes you send a carrier to go and intercept some Argentine grupos on the mainland, and they roll very poorly, or they get hit by an Exocet missile, and public opinion plummets. And that public opinion is a dice roll modifier for ground combat. And so there are knock-on consequences to a lot of these things that happen. Sometimes you're, trying to argue or do diplomacy at the UN. Sometimes there's a papal visit that happens once during the game. And all of those they don't affect public opinion, but those give you negative DRMs in combat because of, the mood, the time of those very inopportune things that can happen. There's a lot of really neat bits and pieces that go into this, and it's part of a series called the British Wars Trilogy. So they have a Don't Tread on Me, which is obviously an American Revolutionary War game, and then there's a Napoleonic game as well, which I don't think either of us have played. I feel like Grant has Don't Tread on Me, but I could be wrong about that. I'm pretty sure he does. But I had there was a lot to like here. What I will do is I'll show you kind of how it works, at least some of it. There's quite a lot of little chrome and bits to go through. So I'll kind of show you how it works, and then we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So here's a look at the map. As you can see, we got the two maps. We have a map of the East Falklands over here, where you're doing your ground forces and kind of the invasion, the landings, and then moving across to Port Stanley. And then this off map, we have a much larger strategic view where you've got the base at Ascension Islands, you've got this total exclusion zone around the Falklands, and then you've got the Argentine coast, which is divided up into these air sectors with a number of different charts and holding boxes and things like that. So the game itself, as a lot of these solitaire games are, very structured. So you just have a sequence of play, and you do have this nice play aid, which is a very detailed sequence of play on it. And any time you see this kind of black triangle, you skip that line or entire section. And you do that if there is one of these no air turns. If it's fogs or squalls, you don't do, you kind of skip those bits. If you ever have gales as the weather's so bad that you just skip a turn. You just lose a turn of the game, which is very punishing, because in this one, you are racing against the clock. You'll have some stiff resistance kind of at the end in and around Port Stanley, but one of the largest factors you're playing against is the clock, it's very interesting. So when you roll those gales turns, it does not feel good. The only other play aid is, there is this other map sheet. I couldn't really fit this into the camera shot, but basically this has your combat results for when you're trying to suppress the Argentine Air Force, or then there's some modifiers for ground combat. But other than that, this is just kind of a holding box. So that's less important, so I wanted to show kind of the real important stuff. Oops, he says knocking this all over. So, what does a turn look like? Well, this is kind of at the very end of the game. Let me kind of move some of my stuff around. I basically called it on this one because you have to have won by the end of the 19th, and I have so far to go because I made such incredibly slow progress here that it's not numerically, it's not possible for me to get there in time. So this is already a lost cause. You don't need to finish playing out the last 2 turns. I physically can't move fast enough and get through the Argentine defenses fast enough to win, unfortunately. But what you do, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to determine the weather for the step. So you consult kind of which set of the turns that you're in, and you can see there's a blue section, a white section and this kind of dark grey section, and those correspond to these 3 weather tables. Roll 2d6, so we're currently on turn 16, and we rolled 6, 7, 8, and so on an 8 we have squalls. Well, great. So in that you would have no air, like no air at all, no Harriers, no Argentine Air Force, so you're going to end up skipping a huge chunk of the game. That's really bad. That's not great for for a demo here, so we're just going to say that we'd rolled a 5, just so that we get some fair weather, and so that we can kind of show this stuff off. Then we have the option, if we have the SAS unit in the total exclusion zone, kind of as part of our readied forces, we can do an SAS raid. And the SAS raids, there's a little menu of those that you can do. Those are all in the rulebook. So you kind of learn them and figure them out pretty quickly, but basically there is a section of the SAS raids that you can do. At this point in the game, I'm going to use them to try to spoof some of these Argentine grupos to suppress them. That way, you know, hopefully there'll be fewer aircraft coming at us, or they'll be coming from less opportune areas. I look at where all of our forces are on the board. They're all in this Sector B. So what I'm looking at over here is that this Gruppo is going to send its planes to Sector B. So I'm going to try to spoof these guys. Oh, you roll a die to select them. Oh, that's what it is. So I'm just going to roll. I'm hoping for a 2. I rolled a 1. So we spoofed this Gruppo instead. So that gets flipped over. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's random. I would like a house rule where you could choose. That would be fun. So basically the SAS are kind of messing around over here, and it scares the Argentines where they have to divert forces, or they're going somewhere else because the SAS are messing around. And so these guys won't be flying to the Falklands this turn. Then you have to roll a saving throw, is what they call it, 3. So 3 turns later, the SAS come back. 1, 2, 3. So on turn 19, if there was one, we would get to use them again. So sometimes you roll those 1s, you get them the next turn, it's going to be great. Sometimes you roll a 6, you're not going to see the SAS for another 6 turns. So kind of a little bit random, a little bit fun there. You can use them to try to do all sorts of things. There are some support planes on the Falklands that you can try to destroy. You can try to reduce the stock of Argentine exocets, which is very important. You can use them to look at, to do recce and to look at these face-down Argentine units to see what they are. That way, you know, you can be a bit better prepared, or like, oh, maybe I can afford to maybe not attack that guy, or this guy's nothing, I'm just going to roll through it. It helps you do a bit more planning, things like that. So that was that. Then you have the option to conduct a diplomatic feint. What you're going to do is you're going to put the diplomatic marker 1 space ahead on the turn track, and then that's going to raise the BBC News marker 3 pips. And that's effectively your morale track. If this is, I think, 6 or below, you take a penalty on attack rolls. If public opinion is, I think, 15 or 16 or higher, you take you get a bonus to your ground attack rolls. So you're trying to keep that up as high as possible. However, if you have the diplomacy marker, that actually hurts your DRMs. So am I going to risk 1, 2, 3? That's an option that you have if you're desperate. I think I'm going to not do it, but you can. Then what we're going to do is, if there are the Argentine warships, so you got the 25th of May, and then there's also the Belgrano, those early in the game are floating around, you can optionally try to attack those and commit resources to that. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to commit some of our forces to attack these grupos, though. And what we're hoping to do is to kind of suppress and eliminate those, and it's going to hopefully reduce some of these. But it's risky because it's a big commitment of forces. The escorts, I'm going to send to Port Stanley, oh, to San Carlos, I apologize, they're going to keep the ground forces in supply. If you only send one, you can supply 2 stacks. I'm going to send 2 so I can supply everyone. And then I'm going to commit HMS Invincible. He's going to go and try and suppress this Sector B guy. When you send an aircraft carrier, they have to take 3 of their corresponding Harriers, which is a big commitment because that's fewer to send over the Falklands. So if I send Hermes, I'm also going to have to take 3 Harriers, and then I've only got, I've got some, it's not a lot, to try and get air superiority over this. So this is the point where I think I'm going to keep Hermes, not do anything with it, because I'd rather have the Harriers free to do this aspect of it later on. But the decision making there, early on you send a bunch of guys here before you do the landings. You're trying to whittle down the Argentine Air Force as quickly as you can. So let's roll this attack. We've only got the 1, and when it's ships against these gruppos, that's where we're going to use this chart here, and we've got this up here, and you roll 3d6, and you consult what you're looking for. So I rolled 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and on the 10 it says, Argentine Gruppo driven off by British carrier. If a carrier is firing, place the Gruppo in the mainland. So this Gruppo goes to the mainland. Move 1 random Argentine plane from the mainland to the repair pool, and it has no effect on the BBC. If you do really well, like really well, and if you shoot down the exocets, which is possible with extremely good rolls, the morale, the BBC News market goes up. If your guys kind of sink or get driven off, the opposite happens. It can be very punishing. So we're going to take from the pool of the Argentine Air Forces, we pick 1 randomly. Nice, that's a very strong one, so that's good to get out. And that goes into the Argentine repair pool. That means it can't fly out and attack us. So in the cup there's 4 chits left. For reference, in this game, I have permanently kind of discarded or shot down this many. So it starts off with a ton of guys out on the board, which is very, very intense. So that's that. He's now kind of finished, so he goes over to this Tralla and South Georgia box. This is basically a kind of a used box. So he can't do anything else, nor can those planes for the rest of the turn. So that's all of that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to determine the target sector. So where is the Argentine Air Force going to go? And generally speaking, they're going to always go to the air sector that has the most British ground forces. Well, spoiler alert, all of my ground forces are in Sector B, hence the target sector is right there. Then we're going to roll to determine the priority of the gruppos, so who launches first, because there's only a certain number of planes left, and they might, if we start with this one, they're going to go to different places, so we'll see. So we're going to roll a die, and the priority is 1. So these guys are flipped over because we spoofed them, so they don't launch any gruppos. Nothing in this sector. So then these 2, each gruppo launches 2 planes. Well, we've got 4. So all 4 of them come out, and they all go to Sector C, which is nice, because we don't have a whole lot there to defend. Alright. So that's what we've got going on. Another thing to note is, if you're ever in the rain or snow, the A4 Skyhawks don't make it, because they were so old and had like the worst or no radar that they can only make it on perfectly clear weather. So there are times where some of these guys just like don't even make it, which is interesting. So that's where all the planes go. I'm not going to do any other ones. There's no more planes left in the cup. So that's their disposition. So knowing what's their current disposition, this will change. I'm going to launch all my Harriers, and there comes a point where there's no reason to hold anything back, basically, unless you think you're going to get absolutely shot out of the sky and you can't get them out of the repair box. So, with the Harriers, all of the Harriers are a 7. Some of them say HI on them, some of them say HH on them. That just means they correspond to the HMS Hermes or the HMS Invincible. And, if the Invincible sinks, all the Harriers are basically lost until you replace them. But So you kind of have to be careful with your carriers. You really got to be careful with them. I've got these two. I've got Morgan and Ward, these two aces. Those have some little special abilities, which we'll kind of go through here in a second. But then I'm going to array my forces such that I am trying to gain air superiority in at least 3 of the 5 sectors. And I definitely want it in this one and hopefully this one as well, because these guys are going to move forward and do some combats in this area, and I'd like to have air superiority there because that's going to give me a modifier. Now, they've got a whole bunch of guys there, but that's kind of the gamble. So you always, always, always want to have some guys in San Carlos, because if you don't have air superiority in San Carlos, some of these guys get flipped to out of supply. It can be very bad. You get all these airstrikes going on. So I'm going to send 3 regular Harriers, and I'm going to send both of my aces. And I'm going to do that because the aces, we're going to resolve a combat here, and then the aces can move to another sector, resolve a combat here, and they can move to another one. So the aces, they can move and contribute to basically all the combats. It's really nice. There is a chance that at least 2 of these guys are going to move into this sector. So I'm going to send, and that would be, this guy could move because he's got a rondelle. This guy is their ace. He could move. That's 12. So I want to have at least 1, 2, 3. That's 21, 24. So we're going to send these guys here, and we're going to get bonuses from that. And then I'm going to send, I'm banking on some of those guys leaving. And I'm going to send the rest of them. Well, I'm going to send 1 here. Shoot. And this is the most interesting part of the game. These guys are going to move. They're going to add 2 there. So do I risk sending more? Oh, that's an awful gamble. I'm going to send 1 more guy here. Okay. I think that's what I'm going to do. So now what we're going to do is we're going to roll for a couple different things that can happen with the Argentine stuff. So we're going to locate all of the guys with the rondelles on them. And then we're going to roll a die. And I rolled a 1. And on a 1, the army General Galtieri has strategic influence this turn and seeks to protect his forces around Stanley. All rondelle planes on the East Falklands map immediately move to Air Sector E. So this guy actually goes away to protect Port Stanley. So that's actually a huge boon for us. That was really good. And then if Donadil, the Argentine ace, is on the map, and he is not in either Air Sector A, Air Sector E, or the target sector, he's going to roll a die. And I rolled a 3. He moves to Air Sector A. That's actually not great. So I have the chance to shoot him down. So let me put those in the air sector. I always put them up in a San Carlos box for some reason. So you have this initial distribution of Argentine air forces that we think they're going to go to. We send out our planes, and then sometimes there's tactical adjustment. Sometimes there isn't, but sometimes there is. So that's basically what happens there. So at this point, we now resolve all the air combat. So air combat, we're going to start here, and we're going to move this way, so I can keep moving my aces with me. So at this point, we have 28 points, and they have 6. And it's simple maths, that's a 4-to-1 ratio. There's no modifiers here, because the modifiers listed in... the air modifiers are in the... They're not... the air modifiers are listed in the rulebook. They're not printed on the map, which is something I kind of find irritating. But they don't have any ground support, basically. You need ground support to get modifiers in air combat. But neither of us have any. You get ground support by having ground units in the sector. The British get ground support by having these little civilian areas under control. The the Argentines, again, if they've got guys in the areas who are going to get them, things like that. So what we'll do is we're just going to roll. Because we have a 4-to-1 advantage, we're just going to go on this chart here, and we're going to roll a single die. And we rolled a 4, which is DE, defender eliminated. When a defender is eliminated, he just goes into the Argentine repair pool. So, now, what we're going to do is we're going to move over to this sector here, and our little aces can come with us. Well, there's no combat there, that's funny. So we'll move over to this sector, and our aces can move. So this one is a little bit hairier. So we don't have any ground support. That's funny, we would have had an ungodly amount of ground support here. So here we've got 28, 42, I believe, 42 to 10. So we're still on 4-to-1 currently. But for each ground force, the Argentines are going to get one. So they're at 15, so really we're only on 2-to-1 because we're at 42. If we were at 45, we'd be at 3-to-1. And we don't have any ground support in this area either, which is irritating. So we're, you know, the little bit of ground support can make a huge difference. If if I had one more plane in there, I'd be rolling on 3-to-1. Very different story. So rolling on the 2-to-1 table, I rolled a 2, that's not good. So we're going on 200, so DOG, which is defender breaks off, I believe. Oh, it means dogfight, apologize. So dogfight, the initial attack is parried as the defending side launches a bold counterattack. We're going to refight the battle, except we're going to roll on the 1-to-1 table, and the attacker is, in every battle basically, the British, the RAF are the attackers, but I suppose they're Royal Navy Harriers, I apologize. But, and so that just changes the distribution of results. Now we're having a dogfight, the Argentines are now the attackers, and we're going to re-roll. We're going to re-roll on the 1-to-1 table. So we're going to roll. I roll a 4, and on a 4, we roll an exchange. And in exchange, we're going to count the number of aircraft strength points on each side, ignoring ground support now. The side with the lower total loses. So that was good for us. So they're going to lose 2 units, go into the repair box. However, it's an exchange. We also lose 2 units. So I'll lose 1 from Invincible, 1 from Hermes, not that it really matters. And those go into the repair box as well. And then I don't think I'm going to fly anywhere else. These guys could move into here and do a combat, but I don't need to. It's unnecessary, so we're not going to worry about that. So at this point, after we've finished all of the air combats, we're going to assess air superiority. And I have these little markers that I have. These are not part of the game. So we have air superiority here, because we're the only ones with planes. Same here, same here, same here, and the Argentines have it here. I do that as a mnemonic, so it's really easy to assess. The British need to have at least 3 sectors with air superiority to keep all of their guys in supply. So that's kind of the end of the air phase, and now we go into the ground war phase. And the ground war is just moving these stacks and getting it to go. So because we have air superiority in this sector and this sector, and we have helicopters in each of these stacks, they can move 3 spaces. Normally, if you're just walking, or yomping, as the game refers to it, you can only move 2 sectors. So if you look at the green track, it's 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. You're going in descending orders. There's no lines joining them up. So we're going to go, with our choppers, 10, 9, 8, 7. And again, to use the choppers, you have to have air superiority kind of all the way that you're going. So now we're going to go, these guys are going to go 8, 7, 6. And then we've got to do a combat. And we have a ground combat. So this is a 9 strength unit. Oh, good gracious. We have 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 strength units. So at the moment, ground combat is simply whoever has the most wins. But this is where we get onto our stack of modifiers. So, the side with air superiority gets +2. So we go from a 14 to a 16. Are they defending in the mountains? No. There's no naval gunfire support, no KLF, there's no fog, there's no squalls. If BBC News was 16 or higher, we'd get a bonus. If it was 6 or lower, we'd get a very heavy penalty. If the diplomacy marker or the Pope marker is on the map, you also take a penalty. So currently we're 16 to 9. We have more than them. That's all we need. And so we defeat them. They surrender. They come off the map. It's done with. The ground combat is not that complicated. And then we're going to do the same thing for these guys. They're going to go 1, 2. And then this one, which I believe is a patrol, which doesn't do a whole lot. That's more of a speed bump. There's a small skirmish. We're going to discard the patrol marker. On a 1, 2, or 3, I have to stop moving. I rolled a 5, so I can move the 1 more space, which is nice. And that's discarded. So the other nice thing about this is that we now control this area, Teal Inlet, and Estancia House, and those have this blue civilian symbol on them. So next time we do air combat, those give us a level of ground support. So we're going to have a +4 from that. 1, 2, we've got ground forces. So next time we do air combat, we'll have like an inherent kind of 7 in this sector. So as you kind of get into areas, you're going to get bonuses from that kind of thing. So that's the ground support segment, or the ground combat segment. We're not doing anything else there. And then basically you kind of have some wrap-up phases that go on. So if there was anyone who was out of supply, if the stacks get flipped over, you'd flip them back over. Anyone who's in this little used box comes back to the TZ, your escorts go back here. And then if there's, and then we roll to see if the 25th of May kind of comes out to port, basically. Oh no. On a 1, 2, or 3, he leaves port. On a 4, 5, or 6, he doesn't. So 1, 2, or 3, he's going to leave port. I rolled a 2. Did I roll a 2? Or yes, I rolled a 2. It was this 2, wasn't it? So he goes to Rio Galleros. So he goes down here. And unfortunately for us, because we haven't taken care of that and he's out into port, if there are any Argentine ships at sea, you flip 1 face-up stack of British ground units in a camp to its out of supply side. This is where you start getting to this is really not good. So these guys are going to flip to out of supply. And basically we then have to commit forces to going and supplying these. You really desperately want to try, before you do your landings in San Carlos after turn 7, you desperately want to knock out both the Belgrano and the 25th of May so that this doesn't happen. You don't have to keep having guys out of supply. Then Argentine parts shortage. They have too many aircraft and not enough logistics, basically. The weakest of the aircraft that's in their repair pool, if there's more than 3, gets permanently discarded, so these A4s are going out of the game. And then the 3 that are left go back into the cup. So that's part of how, if you can get lots of guys in the repair pool, every turn one's going to get permanently discarded. There's a couple of events that are going to remove those as well. And then after that, you complete your repairs. So we've got fair weather, so everyone comes out of the repair box. And all of theirs that went back into the cup out of the repair box. If you have things like rain or snow, only all of them but 1 randomly goes back in the box. So you can keep guys in there, or if there's squalls, or then I think it's if there's fog, they like all stay in there. And so if you do a whole bunch of damage in 1 turn, and then somehow you're keeping guys in there, or events put them in there, and you roll some squalls, they're going to stay in there. You can really pin down some of the Argentine forces doing that. You want to have as many in this pool as possible, because that way they're not attacking you. After that, we get to the fun part. which is rolling on the events table. So the events table is this very large table over here, and what you're going to do is you're going to roll a die. I rolled a 3, and you're going to add the current turn number, so 16. So we've rolled a 19, right? So you look at this 18 or 19 table, and this line, you're going to do every single one of these events. So first is Buckingham Palace. That event can only occur once per game. That event puts out the Scots Guards and the Welsh Guards into the Falklands. That's already happened, and there's a chance that it can really mess up public opinion. Then we have, let's see, we'll do this one, Sidewinder. Sidewinder is you get help with Sidewinder missiles from the Americans. You would roll a die, and you would get 4 new Harriers from Ascension Island. That event's happened a number of times in the game, and I have all available ones, which is why my Air Force is so big. It starts off fairly small. So those are quite positive ones, generally speaking. Then we have Argentine Discipline, which is 1316. Now, Argentine Discipline, we're going to roll 1 die, and then one of the Blue Star armies is going to retreat towards Port Stanley, because they're a little bit scared. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, I rolled a 2, so 1, 2, so he's going to retreat 1 space. Then we've got, so that was Argentine Discipline, then we've got, oh, dang, that sucks. We got the Io Gurkha event. So there's a Gurkha counter. If you're adjacent to an Argentine unit and you've got the Gurkhas, they retreat a space because they were scared. They were definitely afraid of the Gurkhas because of their fearsome reputation. Then we have a collision, so we're going to roll a die. If you roll a 6, you permanently lose a Harrier. If you roll anything other than that, 1 Harrier just goes back to the repair pool, and you do that after you've completed your repairs. So it's important, like, he's not going to be there next round. Like, he's not available to use next round. And then we have a by-election tests the Tories' popularity, which is 1319. You're going to add the number of civilian settlements under British control to the BBC News level. So that's a good thing. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that was good. We've liberated these people from Argentine control. Public opinion goes up in the by-election. That's nice. Now that we've done all of the events on our headlines table, all the planes kind of go back home. So let's just pick these all up. And they just go back to the TZ. And I'll just remove my air superiority markers. Again, those are not part of the game. That's extra components that I have kicking around at home. Move those guys back to where they were. I forget, but who knows. And then this guy goes back into the cup. And then you start a new turn, so you move on to the next turn. But that's how this game works. You're going to use Exocet missiles if you roll extremely poorly on your table down here. If you send carriers to support Grupos, they can launch Exocets. If you roll a 5 or less on 3d6, you deserve it. But you're going to lose the carrier. The BBC News marker is going to go down by 10. It's a real bad time. You don't want to do that. You want to roll real high so you can remove their Exocets because you shoot them down with your chaff. It's very difficult to do. But then you also suppress the Grupos, removing guys. Your BBC News goes up by 5. Very, very good. But that's the game. It's not necessarily the most complicated game. There's a bunch of different steps in it, but the events will throw things at you or put you in a bind, and you have these fairly limited resources, especially early in the game. Like, early in the game, I think you have, like, I don't know, 9 Harriers. Like, it's such a small amount, because they all start on Ascension Island, and you've got to get those Sidewinder events to bring them on. And so you have very few to fight these with, but you don't do the San Carlos landings until a third of the way through the game. So you're just focusing on trying to neutralize their air force and trying to sink the Belgrano and the Argentine aircraft carriers as well. But that's how the game works, and what we'll do is wrap up with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the map. I was inspired to play this because I have been reading this book. That's very professional. 3 Days in June by James O'Connell, which is, so far, I'm about halfway through, and, well, it's like, well, yeah, with all the stuff at the end. About halfway through. Fascinating book. We'll talk about that later on and probably get back to some of this stuff, but my brother recommended that book to me because he'd read it. It's kind of brand new, half the presses. And so we were then at WBC and they had this on the shelf, and this is a game that I had looked at in the past, but it had just never, the stars hadn't aligned. It's not as if we didn't have a million games to play anyway. But we were there, it was there, and I was reading the book and I thought, I'm going to just do it anyway. Grant made a video about all of the Bed and Madison games that he's played. That's one of his, I'd say it's one of his favorite wargame designers, at least definitely one of his favorite solo wargame designers. But this was an opportunity for me to kind of dive in there as well, something that was topical and interesting to me. Watched a good number of documentaries about this. A lot of my friends at school, their parents fought in the Falklands, or failing that, were in the military at that time, because I'm an Army brat. And so there's a lot of familiarity with the Falklands conflict that went on, and so playing another game about it, especially one that is slightly more modern and in print, was something that I kind of couldn't resist. So I had a really good time playing this. There are some solitaire games out there that it's like on the cusp of like, oh, it just leaves you a little bit wanting. There's not enough meat there for what they are. Some of them, you want those really light ones. They're light, they're short, and it's kind of like a little filler thing. If I'm going to sit down for 2 or 3 hours to play this from start to finish, I want it to be a little bit of meat, a little bit of beef, a little bit of something there. And to me, this has that. Sure, you're moving down 3 tracks, but making sure that you have the air superiority to do that, and that you're trying to take the civilian kind of population locations kind of as early as possible to support the other elements of the track in the different air sectors, so you can maximize your modifiers. Things like that are really important. Trying to take care of all the Argentine Air Force, and it's that war of attrition, and is something I really, really liked. And I like that in any game where there is, yeah, you've got your little tactical cool bits and pieces that going on, but I want the campaign to have a good arc and a story. And this has that. When those first couple turns, when you set up and the Argentine Air Force comes out, and I think it was like the Brazilians like send a bunch more grupos and help them out, and there's like, anywhere from like 10 to 12 Argentine planes flying over the Falklands, and you're sat there with your like 6 or 7 Harriers, you're like, this is going to get overwhelming very quickly. But as the turns go on, as the weather, hopefully you get some bad weather, because bad weather's good, but not too bad. When you get like rain or snow, the A4 Skyhawks can't make it to the Falklands, because they were like very rudimentary and didn't have radar on them, and so they could never find it. They could only find the Falklands on clear skies. So some of those planes don't make it. Or if you shoot down enough, or if enough have to go into the repairs, the Argentine supply chain was not good, and if you've got more than 3 planes in the Argentine repair box, one of those permanently gets discarded out of the game. And so if you can whittle them down over the course of those turns, keep some guys in the repair box with bad weather, a guy's going to kind of always stay in there. If you can get into, I think some of the no air turns, whether you've got like the fog and things like that, they all stay in there. And so it's over the course of the game, they start up here, and then if you are playing it well, the Air Force is going to slowly descend to where, towards the end of the game, probably the last quarter or a third of it, their Air Force is very small, and hopefully yours has grown by the influx of kind of extra force projection through the Sidewinder missiles, which is an event that came up a number of times in the game. So your force kind of grows a little bit, gets a bit stronger. It gets a bit more focused when you have ground forces out as well. And theirs is being whittled down. You get this, it's the crossing of the two lines, and you get to that little event horizon where you then start getting over the top and you feel a bit better about it. But at that point, you're now racing against the time. Like, you have to win by the end of the game, otherwise, you lose. And so it's a really neat story of trying to overcome all that pressure, whilst, in a small way, trying to bump the diplomacy, trying to get successes in combats to keep that public opinion with the BBC News up. Sometimes you just get crummy events that kind of hose you on that. It happens. Trying to deal with inopportune events that happen at like the worst possible times, and then moving to ground combat. The ground combat's very simple to resolve, which I appreciated as well. They just kind of march and progress, and again, it's more of a timing thing. And then once you get to the forces outside Port Stanley, those are the ones, and they won't have come too far across the map. Those are very strong, and then you have to have got all the modifiers. You have to have maximize the forces that you've got, and get your air superiority, and set up your naval gunfire support line. And hopefully you maybe have been able to push them back with your Gurkhas, or with some other events where they're kind of, the Argentine morale breaks a little bit and they kind of retreat a little bit. But if you can force them all back, then they're gonna surrender at the end of the game. So it's very intense, and it's very difficult. That's what I would say. It's a very challenging game. But again, if I'm going to play a solitaire game and I'm going to play it for 2 to 3 hours, I want it to be challenging. I want it to be difficult. I want it, but not in a way that it's like, this game is unfair. Like, you want to have a chance, but you want that chance to be small enough where when you do it, it's extremely rewarding, and you still want to do it again. But as opposed to, there are some games where you play and it's like, I can never win this. And it's almost like you lose hope and it's like, okay, I'm done with that. Or there's ones where you win it the first time and you're like, that was too easy. I don't have the impetus to try again. This is a really perfect middle ground to me, where it's very challenging, but it's also a lot of stuff to do. It's enjoyable to play the game, organizing, what you're going to do, dispersing your air forces, trying to manipulate things. It's a really neat system. I appreciated the design, and I had a really enjoyable time playing this. I did also really like the theme, as a surprise to no one. And so this is always, that helps because it's something that I want to engage in. It's always interesting to kind of walk through some of this stuff, and some of these events that are on here, that was like one line in a documentary, and you get a few lines on here with a little bit of explanation. It's like, oh, okay, that's how this had a bit more of an effect, and you can kind of see that a little bit better, that was nice to do as well. So, all in all, I had a blast playing this. I will be giving this to Grant, and I'm sure he will play this also. But if this is something that you are interested in, especially if you've been looking at something like Where There Is Discord, genuinely I might sell that game having played this, because this is much more playable from a size standpoint, and also it's much better developed. And it's a lot of the similar types of things, but this is a little bit more focused, and I think just generally speaking, probably a rounder product itself. So, if you're interested, Mrs. Thatcher's War from White Dog Games, check it out on their website. You can get it through Blue Panther. Would appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.